From an anonymous plaintiff to a bombshell revelation, the identity of the first Jane Doe in the case against P. Diddy is revealed to be Anna Kane, ex-wife of NHL player Evander Kane. For more than a year, we only knew her as Jane Doe, the accuser whose lawsuit included these pictures of her alongside P. Diddy at his recording studio. But just last week, a U.S. district judge ruled that Kane must make her name public. So what does all that mean for her case moving forward? And for all the other Jane and John Does who filed suit? Will their names soon become public too? To fully understand where we are at right now, we have to go back to November of last year, when Cassandra Ventura, also known as the singer Cassie, filed civil suit against her ex-boyfriend, Sean Diddy Combs. Cassie's lawsuit has long been credited with opening the floodgates in the cases against Diddy, both civilly and criminally. Her lawsuit alleged she endured years of abuse from Diddy, physically, emotionally, and sexually. That's also where we first heard the now infamous term freak off. Cassie filed her civil suit under the New York Survivors Act that allowed any victims to file suit against their alleged abuser, regardless of the statute of limitations. Cassie's lawsuit was settled outside of court just one day after it was filed, but it was too late. The damage was done. In the following days, a slew of other lawsuits were filed under the New York Survivors Act too, by plaintiffs Joy Dickerson-Neal, Liza Gardner, and Jane Doe. We now know Jane Doe to be Anna Kane, but for a year she was simply Jane Doe, who alleged Diddy sexually assaulted her when she was underage. Her allegations date back to 2003, when she was just 17 years old in the 11th grade. Her lawsuit states at this time, Diddy was twice her age and one of the most well-known and influential music artists of all time. She met one of Diddy's friends, Harvey Pierre, who's listed as a defendant in her lawsuit, at a club near Detroit. So Harvey Pierre says Diddy would love to meet Anna Kane and even calls Diddy on the phone. After that, they take a private jet to New York. But not before Harvey Pierre allegedly, quote, began to smoke crack cocaine from what appeared to be an aluminum can and forced Kane to perform oral sex on him. Once in New York, Kane says the evening became a blur, but she was raped by Diddy, Harvey Pierre, and an unidentified other person. So while Kane didn't list her name in this lawsuit at the time, she did include multiple photos of her from the night she was allegedly assaulted. The pics clearly show Kane, who again was underage at the time and from Canada, in New York at P. Diddy's recording studio, even sitting on his lap. Okay, I know you're multitasking when you're watching our videos, and if you're out and about running errands, listen up. I have to tell you about this free app Upside that gets you cash back on daily essentials. I use it every time I pump my gas because it's so easy to use and free. Here's what you do. Download the Upside app and claim an offer for whatever you're buying. Pay as usual and simply follow the steps on the app to get paid. To find out how much you could earn, click the link in the description to download Upside, or scan the QR code on your screen and use our promo code LCNews to get an extra 25 cents back on every gallon on your first tank of gas. The original suit was filed late last year, but by February of this year, a judge ruled Kane must identify herself. The ruling reads, quote, "The court recognizes that public disclosure of Doe's identity could have a significant impact on her, particularly given the graphic and disturbing allegations in this case. While the court does not take plaintiffs' concerns lightly, the court cannot rely on generalized, uncorroborated claims that disclosure would harm plaintiff to justify her anonymity. Without more specific support, plaintiff fails to overcome the prejudice to defendants and public interest factors implied here." The judge points out that other sexual assault accusers in high-profile cases of Kevin Spacey and Harvey Weinstein were required to identify themselves. According to this ruling, there are several reasons that the plaintiff, that's Jane Doe, should remain anonymous. If the case was highly sensitive and personal, if the identification of her risks mental or physical harm for both her or others, if plaintiff, meaning Jane Doe, could be harmed when the name is revealed, whether the defendant, in this case P. Diddy, is prejudiced by allowing plaintiff to release the name, if the name had already been kept anonymous, if the case is of public interest, and if there are alternate means of protecting confidentiality. In this ruling, the judge breaks down all these factors. The doc reads, quote, "This case concerns highly sensitive and personal matters, including allegations that defendants trafficked, drugged, and gang raped Doe. Although plaintiff is now an adult, she was a minor when the alleged incidents occurred, making the case particularly sensitive. Regarding Factor 7, plaintiff maintains, and defendants do not dispute, that other than informing defendants of her identity, Doe has not publicly revealed her identity related to these allegations. So that sounds like a win for Kane or Jane Doe at the time, but these next points laid out aren't as big of wins. According to the filing, plaintiff, meaning Jane Doe or Anna Kane, has not identified any current vulnerabilities warranting anonymity. The defendants have identified prejudice. Public factors weigh in favor of disclosure. Alternate mechanisms for protecting confidentiality exist, and a balance of factors weighs against anonymity. The next part reads, quote, although this case involves highly sensitive allegations and Doe has not publicly revealed her identity, all other factors weigh against plaintiff's motion should this case survive defendant's dispositive motions. She has failed to demonstrate particularized harm or current vulnerabilities. Defendants have demonstrated prejudice they would suffer. The public interest factors weigh in favor of disclosure, and there are at least some measures that could be implemented to protect sensitive information exchanged during discovery. For the foregoing reasons, the court denies plaintiff's motion to proceed anonymously, but stays the effect of this order until after the court decides the pending motion for judgment on the pleadings. So even though this ruling had been made, the plaintiff's name remained Jane Doe on the lawsuit until a new ruling last week. This court doc mainly responds to the defense's claim that Anna Kane's allegations are time-barred and that corporate defendants listed are not liable. But at the very end, the judge sneaks in this ruling, quote, plaintiff is also now directed to comply with the court's earlier ruling, ECF number 49, finding that she may no longer proceed anonymously. And that's why we now know Anna Kane's name. Before all this, Kane was mainly known as the ex-wife of NHL player Evander Kane. But she's got a following of her own, including on Instagram, where she boasts more than 77,000 followers. In the wake of her name being revealed, Kane made a statement through her attorney, reading in part, quote, I'd hope to use a pseudonym in pursuing justice for what happened to me as a teenager. Defendants demands that I use my name was an attempt to intimidate me, but I am not intimidated. I'm prepared to proceed and hold accountable those who've harmed me. So what does all this mean for Anna Kane and the other accusers who are so far anonymous? So we're turning now to former federal prosecutor Nima Rahmani. Nima, thank you so much for coming on. It's always great when we get to talk to you.
Oh, Sierra, thanks for having me as always. Big news today.
This is big news today. We're talking about Jane Doe. We finally now know her identity as Anna Kane. What do you think right from the jump? Do you think this is the right call of the court to rule that she has to reveal her name publicly?
Well, it's a yes and no. I'm used to state law, and under state law in states like California, victims of sexual abuse, especially sexual abuse as a minor, can remain anonymous. But we're in federal court, and there is no corresponding rule of civil procedure. This is one of those cases where laws in different states, or even within a state, between state and federal court, can differ. And under the federal rule of civil procedure 10, there's a presumption that the parties are not going to be anonymous.
So why is that, do you think, that the court ruled in this way? I can understand from her perspective why she wanted to keep her name out of the news, but do you think it was a justifiable ruling?
I think it is. Obviously, there's no real clear answer here. Judges have a lot of discretion because, again, it's not like there's a hard and fast rule where if you're a victim of sexual assault, if you're a victim of sexual abuse, you get to remain anonymous, like certain states have. So it's up to the judge, and he or she needs to weigh different factors. And one of them is there any prejudice to the defendant? Does it make it more difficult for him to defend his case not knowing who it is? Is there potential harm to the plaintiff or the victim who wants to remain anonymous? What about the sensitive nature of the allegation? So the judge balanced them here and ultimately ruled that upon balancing, it actually favors Combs, and that's why she had to really unmask herself and identify herself in the pleadings.
Unmask is an interesting word to use because we have been talking, you and I, many others, about Jane Doe for about a year at this point. We feel like we know her case inside and out, but now this just blows it out of the water. It's a person now. We have a name. We can kind of trace back the timeline of her life. How does that change things for Anna Kane now that her name is public?
Well, it does potentially change things and change things for other victims as well. So there is a strategic benefit here because maybe people that don't want their identity revealed, maybe they'll be a little bit hesitant to file a lawsuit or accuse someone like Combs if they have to identify themselves. Obviously, there are people watching. Some of them believe that she was assaulted and what she's doing is righteous. And I'm sure there are people watching who disagree. And, when people are identified in a very public lawsuit, which this is, I wouldn't be surprised if she gets some hate comments or folks who don't believe her. So it may be an impediment. I certainly believe victims of abuse, but it may give some of them pause when deciding whether to file a lawsuit or not.
That's interesting talking about future lawsuits that could be filed against P. Diddy or whoever else it may be. But there already are some John and Jane Does out there who filed suit. They just haven't made their name public as of yet. So, what do you think this ruling about Anna Kane means for those suits? Do you think they will have to reveal their names?
Not necessarily. Really, this is a judge-specific ruling. Now, with respect to this judge, absolutely. I would advise my clients, and I represent victims of sexual abuse and assault all the time. I'd say, if we draw this judge, there is a very real possibility that you're going to have to identify yourself. Do you still want to move forward? I have clients all the time that tell me, I'm scared, I'm worried about myself, about my family, people online. I don't want to do this unless I can remain anonymous. So it is an important factor. And I think lawyers are going to have to start advising their clients, hey, if we draw the wrong judge in federal court, you may have to identify yourself and you still want to move forward. But with respect to different judges, it doesn't matter. There's no precedential impact. One judge doesn't have to follow another judge, of course, unless it's a higher court, which this isn't.
It's interesting about this case, too. You pointed out Jane Doe was only 17 when these allegations occurred. So obviously she's underage at that point. But you mentioned there's no statute federally if the person is underage to remain anonymous. So do you think that is going to affect the other cases as well? Because we do have some that allege P. Diddy abused them. They're only 9 years old, 13 years old. Now, if there's no federal statute about that, that's one thing, but also it's a really young, tender age. So does that play into all of it?
That's something the judge may take into consideration. Obviously, we're talking about allegations that are more than 2 decades old with respect to Anna Kane and with respect to the 13-year-old. So the question is a judge going to take that into consideration? Hey, you were 9, you were 13, you weren't 17. Now, obviously, Anna Kane was just in high school at the time. She was just in 11th grade when all this allegedly happened. So I still think that she's a minor. So will a judge potentially draw a distinction? I don't know. I think that's going to really depend on the judge and what their views are in terms of transparency and public access in these types of cases.
We're talking so much about the civil side of things right now because if we recall, 1 year ago, there were no charges filed against P. Diddy. It was all speculation and it was civil suits. So this kind of paved the way for those criminal charges. So I'm wondering, is it possible Jane Doe, now we know her name as Anna Kane, if she could be called to testify or be involved in P. Diddy's criminal case?
It's certainly possible, and obviously, there's a higher standard in a criminal case, and criminal prosecutors tend to be a little bit more conservative. They're not going to take a kitchen sink approach and charge the more than 100 victims who will probably file civil lawsuits in this case. Obviously, dozens of them have already. They're going to pick and choose the ones that they think are the strongest witnesses and victims. That being said, Sarah, you and I have talked about this. Minor victims change the game for Combs, for Jay-Z. It doesn't matter. And this is why. The argument has always been that, at least with respect to the freak offs that happened, they were consensual. Well, certainly someone like Kane or any other minor can't consent to sexual contact. So the defense will be very different. It'll be that the contact never happened at all and that this is all fabricated.
It's interesting we're talking about people being named because we have Jane Doe. We now know her name is Anna Kane. And then in a different suit, we have Celebrity A that we now believe to be Jay-Z. There's still Celebrity B, a female. We're not exactly sure who she is. We could infer. But now we have Jay-Z's name listed here. Do you think that some of the other lawsuits that right now just have a person listed as unidentified or Celebrity A, whatever it may be, that their identities could also be revealed soon too?
I do believe so, and this goes to some of the strategies that we've talked about, right? The defense wants to unmask these plaintiffs, but some of the plaintiffs' lawyers, what they're trying to do is enter into a pre-litigation settlement, right? Obviously, that's confidential. We talked about lawsuits; those are public, right? The allegations are public. Maybe it can remain anonymous, maybe it can't, but the details are certainly public. Obviously, an out-of-court settlement before a lawsuit is private. So what Tony Busby and some of the lawyers representing the plaintiffs tried to do is, negotiate a pre-litigation settlement. Obviously, it didn't work in the Jay-Z case, and now that's all become public. But I do believe that that is the first domino, and we're going to see more and more celebrities named, whether it's Celebrity B. Obviously, there's a lot of speculation as to who that is, that female celebrity. But I wouldn't be surprised if there's other celebrities named as well, because look, I mean, I'm here in Hollywood, and there are a lot of people who went to Diddy's white parties, and allegedly a lot of people who participated in these freak-offs, whether as actual participants or witnesses. So I think it's just a matter of time before we start seeing and hearing more names.
It's interesting the parallels between P. Diddy and now Jay-Z, the fact that we have a year ago, P. Diddy did not settle with Cassie before she filed, and that's again, we can all go back to that. That's what opened the floodgates. And now again, we see this with Jay-Z, didn't settle outside of court. Now we, the public, know his name. I mean, what do you make of that?
Yeah, this is going to go one of two ways. And not only did Jay-Z not settle, he actually filed against Busby, pretty aggressive move alleging extortion. So there was no offer, and in fact, a lawsuit was filed affirmatively by Jay-Z's lawyer, Alex Spiro of Quinn Emanuel. So that case isn't going to settle. So I think this is going to go in one of two ways. Either this is going to be a one-off case that Jay-Z and his lawyer will defend, potentially settle. I'm not saying it's going to go all the way to trial, but it's just going to be one. Or this might be a Me Too type situation. Having represented lots of victims, there is always a hesitation to be first, especially if you're filing against a rich and powerful individual that has a lot of assets, especially access to lawyers. So we've seen it with Cassie Ventura, right? When she filed, other people came forward. So is this going to be a snowball effect like we saw with Diddy, or is this just going to be an isolated case? I think we'll know in the coming weeks and months.
Yeah, I guess we just have to be patient. We've been following Diddy for a year, and you can look at the developments between then and now. So we'll see where this is going with everyone involved. Nima, thank you for coming on with us today and giving us your 2 cents.
Thanks for having me, Sierra. As always, I'm sure we're going to be talking real soon.
We talked a lot about civil allegations today, but P. Diddy also faces multiple federal sex crimes charges. For those, he's pleaded not guilty and is set to go to trial in May 2025. For Law&Crime, I'm Sierra Gillespie.